Tonight, we step beyond the village door, beyond the cradle and the hearth, beyond the places where neighbours watched over births and priests blessed the rooms. A time before hospitals, and before birth was something a woman survived only with skill, courage, and quiet hands. There were women who crossed the dark between worlds. Women who were called in the night, not by family or neighbours, but by something older, something unseen. They knew how to bring life safely through pain. They carried more than herbs and cloth. They carried knowledge of thresholds, of what lay just out of reach of mortal eyes. They helped where no blessing reached, and where fear whispered too loudly in the mind. They walked into places where daylight never lingered, where shadows were alive, where the worlds of human and fairy touched. Sometimes they returned, but sometimes they never came back. This is the story of the Fairy Midwife.
Welcome, Wanderer.
And thank you for joining us on the path.
This is the Roaming Raven podcast.
A place for old stories, whispered magic, and the folklore that still clings to the hedgerows.
Each week, we'll be guiding you through a tale drawn from witchcraft, folklore, and folk belief.
Stories of cunning folk and wise women, of charms and curses, of herbs that heal and words that bind.
We'll explore the legends themselves,
and then wander deeper into what they meant to the people who told them.
Their remedies, their rituals, their fears and hopes, and the strange, beautiful ways they made sense of the world.
These are not just stories of magic. They're stories of survival, of knowledge passed quietly from hand to hand, of power found in plants, in ritual, and in the spoken word.
So make yourself comfortable, light a candle, pour a cup of tea, or walk with us beneath the trees.
This is folklore for the witchy, history for the curious, and a path for anyone who feels called by the old ways.
We are your hosts, Paula and Tracy, and this
is the Roaming Raven podcast.
Can you hear the wings beat? Can you hear the sound? Lifting up the heavy hearts from the frozen ground. It's the folklore of the future. It's the history of now. Taking back the scepter and the iron-willed vow. Slower now, the mist rolls in, the bird begins to sing of every hidden, holy, and forgotten thing.
The Midwife of the Hollow Hill. In a village of stone and peat called Larkspur, there lived a midwife named Ira. She was small, dark-haired, and walked with a steady step, even in storms. She carried her tools in a satchel of oiled leather, clean cloths, honey, goose fat, dried raspberry leaf, and a charm sewn in blue thread by her mother before her death. She had delivered nearly every child in Larkspur, and many beyond it. She knew the smell of good labour and bad labour. She knew when a mother would live and when she would not. One winter night, as frost furred the window panes, there came a knock at her door. 3 soft knocks, not loud, not urgent, but certain. A woman stood outside, wrapped in a cloak the colour of moss after rain. Her face was pale and fine-boned, her eyes dark as wells. "My sister labours," the woman said. "She needs you now." Ira took her satchel and followed. They walked past the last cottage, past the sheepfold, past the standing stone, into the hill where the hawthorn grew twisted and white. There the ground opened, not like a hole, but like a door. Inside was a hall of stone and root, lit with pale blue light, and on a bed of fern lay a woman in labour. She did not scream, she sang, low and wordless, as if the pain had melody. Ira did her work. She washed her hands in clear water. She pressed herbs to the woman's lips. She caught the child as it slid into the world. The baby's skin was silver grey. Its eyes were closed, but its ears were long and thin. Ira wrapped it in cloth and gave it to its mother. The fairy women watched her with bright, still faces. When it was done, the moss-cloaked woman pressed something into Ira's palm. "Anoint your eyes," she said, "so you may see us as we are." Ira touched her fingertip to the anointment and rubbed one eye. At once the hall changed. The lights burned cold and sharp. The walls were old bone. The singers' faces were narrow and hollow. She did not touch her other eye. She was led home before dawn. From that day Ira could see them, fair folk in hedges, in water, on the road at dusk, and she learned their rule: never speak of them, never name them, never take their gifts. But one day at market she saw a woman buying milk, who was not a woman at all. Her feet were backwards in her shoes. Without thinking, Ira whispered, "A fairy!" The fairy woman turned. That night Ira's door was knocked again, 3 soft knocks. She was never seen in Larkspur again, and mothers still say, when birth is hard and the wind is strange, the fairy midwife is near.
So, this story, the midwife taken into the fairy world, it crops up everywhere, all over Britain, Ireland, even across Europe.
But the details change. Sometimes she's carried underground into a hill, sometimes into a lake, sometimes into a hollow tree. But the pattern, it's always the same. A woman skilled in birth is summoned. She crosses a boundary and she returns changed.
And it's not just fantasy, is it? Birth back then was one of the most dangerous moments of life. Mothers died, the babies died, and midwives were witnesses to that every single day.
So it makes perfect sense that folklore imagined birth as something so powerful it reached across worlds. If human babies needed help, then, well, fairy babies must need it too.
But here's the thing, she's not dragged off kicking and screaming, is she? She's asked.
Which tells us something really important. Fairy folklore isn't about chaos, it's about rules. Don't speak names, don't take gifts, don't look too closely.
I do wonder though, why don't they have their own midwife? Anyway, so the poor fairy midwife, she walks the line between help and danger.
Just like birth itself.
Midwives weren't just helpers though, were they? They were like walking pharmacies.
Seriously, their bags were packed with plants for every stage. things to speed labour, calm fear, stop bleeding, help the womb recover afterwards. That was some bag.
Oh yeah, maybe more like a trolley. I think she needed a small car, in fact. And the first one that comes to mind is raspberry leaf tea. That was a big one, wasn't it? Toning the uterus, easing contractions. Midwives swore by it.
Yeah, and fennel or anise for pain and digestion, especially after birth when everything was, well, recovering.
Ouch. Plus lavender to calm the room and the mother. Just a few drops and the whole atmosphere shifted.
Mugwort pops up again too, for pain, for dreams and for protection during labour. It really was the herb of thresholds.
Absolutely. But even honey and goose fat, really simple things to use to treat cracked skin and wounds.
But here's the thing, herbs weren't just physical, they carried meaning.
Absolutely. Raspberry for female strength, lavender meant peace, mugwort meant crossing between the worlds.
So this bag that the midwife carried, it wasn't just a medicine chest.
No, or a medicine trolley. No, it was part spell kit.
Part prayer.
Let's talk about the charms, the iron and the thresholds, and protection during birth. Because childbirth wasn't just physically dangerous, was it? It was viewed as spiritually vulnerable too.
Yeah, birth was seen as a doorway, and doorways, thresholds, need guarding. The mother and baby were passing between worlds in a way, I don't know, that drew attention.
You know, I think really they needed a Doberman. That's a really good guard dog. Anyway, so what kind of protection would a midwife or a family set up?
I'm just picturing the Doberman at the door.
Beautiful image.
Well, yeah. They need lots of things, and they might seem random to us now, but they all had purpose. Iron was placed under the bed, horseshoes, nails, anything, scissors were left hanging open near the cradle, and red thread, which comes up a lot, is tied to the mother's wrist. Salt sprinkled in corners, bread tucked under the pillows.
Oh my God, can you imagine? Health and safety would have a total field day there, wouldn't they? Whew. So these weren't just hopeful gestures, they were deliberate gestures.
Yeah, they were like literally marking their territory, saying to anything that wandered near, whether spirit, fairy or ill intent, this space is protected. You do not cross this line.
Let's hope the Doberman is not going to mark his territory, because we all know what that looks like. So back to the fairies. Fairies in folklore, they were very respectful of boundaries, weren't they?
Yeah, they operated by strict rules, like seriously strict rules. If you marked your space properly, they'd leave you alone. But if you broke their rules, if you spoke when you shouldn't, stared when you shouldn't, took gifts you weren't meant to keep, then you were punished without mercy.
Sounds like public school to me. So this is why every fairy midwife story has these same warnings. Don't speak, don't stare, don't reveal what you've seen.
Yeah, and that's the thing about protection that's easy to miss. It's not about force, not about fighting anything off. It's about order, knowing where the line is, marking it clearly and having the wisdom to keep it.
The line between worlds and between safety and danger.
Exactly. Birth was where those lines blurred, and the cunning folk knew how to keep them clear.
Let's get on to some exciting stuff then. Changelings and midwives. We've been talking about fairy midwives as these mystical, magical figures, but now I think we need to address the darker side, because folklore, it's not always gentle, is it?
No, it seriously isn't. And this is where things get uncomfortably real.
Ouch, what do you mean by that?
Well, in early modern Europe, people genuinely believed that fairies stole human babies and replaced them with something else, called a changeling.
That sounds like a way to explain what exactly?
Illness. disability, strange behaviour. Any child who didn't develop as expected, who was sickly or different, could be labelled a changeling, and that belief had devastating consequences.
And midwives, they were caught up in all of this.
Sometimes, yeah. Midwives were occasionally suspected of helping the fairies, not because they wanted to harm anyone, but because they were present at the threshold. They were there at the exact moment a baby entered the world, the moment when the veil was at its thinnest.
So their very presence made them suspect.
Well, like everything in old-time witchcraft, yeah. There are actual court records, real historical documents, where women accused of witchcraft were said to have given a child to the fair folk.
Good grief, that's heartbreaking.
It is, and it tells us something painful about why folklore exists in the first place. It became a way to explain tragedy. When a baby didn't thrive, when a mother died in childbirth, when things went wrong and there was no medical explanation, people, as always, needed someone to blame.
Of course, and too often it was the woman who tried to help.
Yep, the midwife, the healer, the one who held the mother's hand through the worst night of her life, she became the scapegoat.
So the fairy midwife stories, they're not just magic, they're also a record of fear and suspicion of what happened when help was mistaken for harm.
Yeah, and we can't tell one without acknowledging the other.
So we've walked through the stories and the herbs, the protections, the darker side of changeling beliefs. But how about we take a step back now and ask, what does the fairy midwife really represent?
That's a really good question. I think she's the human who walks into the unknown willingly. She's called across a threshold and she goes.
Wow, what a brave character. So she's essentially knowledge crossing worlds.
Yeah, and everything she knows about birth, about herbs, about care, she takes that with her into a realm where human rules don't quite apply.
And it's dangerous there, isn't it? Even though she's helping, it's like, ooh, scary stuff.
Yeah, seriously, always dangerous. She's caretaken into a place where care isn't guaranteed to protect her. That's the tension at the heart of every version of this story.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would agree to go, frankly. What about the ointment? The fairy ointment that she puts on the baby's eyes and then later gets on her own eye.
Well, that's a key moment in this story. The ointment on the eye. That's a metaphor for awareness. It lets her see what she wasn't supposed to see. The fairies as they truly are.
Yeah, but in the story, they actually invited her to do that. So it's almost like that's a gift that they gave her at that time, don't you think?
Well, that's why she can never fully return. Why she's banished from the fairy world or finds herself unable to stay. The story is warning us some knowledge changes you permanently.
So you can't unsee it. You can't go back to the person you were before.
Yeah, and once you've glimpsed the other side, and we know this, don't we? We know this to be true. Whether that's the spirit world or deep wisdom or the raw truth of life and death, you carry it with you forever.
Absolutely. But the story isn't just a warning, is it? Isn't it also a way of honouring?
Yeah, at its core, it honours midwives, the women who stood between life and death, night after night, with nothing but their knowledge and their hands and their courage.
Women who walked into the unknown every single time they were called to a birth.
Yeah, and maybe that's the real magic.
Not the spells or the potions or the fairy ointment.
Just showing up, helping, staying present in the threshold.
Yeah, that's the magic we can all carry. Okay, let's go on to the historical case study of the Fairy Midwife. And this week's story got me thinking about one of the oldest fairy midwife legends on record, from down your way. In fact, it comes from Devon, well, closer to you than me, Devon in southwest England.
This is the one where a real human woman gets taken to help a fairy give birth.
That's the one. And what I love about it is that it's not framed as some grand fantasy adventure. It's actually very practical.
Practical how?
Well, she's just a working midwife and an ordinary woman in an ordinary life. She's asleep in her cottage, probably exhausted from a long day, and then there's a knock at the door in the night.
Dun, dun, dun. Classic beginning, and we all know the rule.
Oh, yeah.
Never answer strange knocks at night.
I know, why do they do it? You should never answer a strange knock at the night, but she does. And outside there's a small man dressed in green, can't imagine who that would be, and he says his wife is in labour and needs her help immediately.
And she just goes with him, doesn't she?
Well, she does, a little reluctantly, but yes, she does. So he leads her out across the moor, and at some point, she can't quite tell when, the landscape changes. They pass through a mound or a hill or a ring of stones. It depends, it varies from version to version.
That borderland again, isn't it? The threshold between worlds.
Exactly, always the borderland. So inside, she finds herself in this beautiful underground hall where a fairy woman is in labour. And here's the really important bit. She helps deliver the baby exactly as she would a human child.
So no magic spells? No glowing crystals or fairy dust?
No, little disappointing, right? Nothing like that. Just midwifery. Clean cloths, warm water, gentle hands. The same stuff she'd use in any cottage in Devon, in fact.
I love that. The fairies don't have their own magic for birth. They need her. They need human knowledge.
Exactly. But after the birth, she's given an ointment to rub on the baby's eyes. And, it's some kind of protective balm.
Yeah. And of course, she gets some on her own eye.
Of course she does. She accidentally... I do wonder if it was accidental. Anyway, she accidentally touches her own eye and suddenly she can see the fairy world properly. Not the glamour that they cast, but the truth beneath it.
So what does she see?
What she sees is that what previously looked rich and golden is actually rough and threadbare. The fine hall is really just a hollow hill. The shining clothes are leaves and moss held together with nothing more than illusion.
Wow. That's such a powerful metaphor, like seeing behind the veil and realising the magic was never about the pretty surface.
Exactly, and that's why in most versions she's never allowed back. She's seen too much, so the fairies banish her or the way closes behind her. She carries that knowledge, but she can never return.
So the gift of sight becomes a kind of exile.
Yeah, a little sad really, isn't it? And I think that's the heart of the story. Some truths, once seen, they separate you from the world you knew.
It really is a powerful image, isn't it? That moment of seeing through the veil and then having to live with it.
So, let's talk about what happens to the fairy midwife afterwards. She just goes home.
In most versions, yeah. She returns to the human world. Sometimes she's given a gift, a token of payment for help. Sometimes she's given a stern warning never to speak of what she's seen.
And what about the sight? Does she get to keep the sight? Can she still see fairies?
Yeah, she can. For a while, until one day, and this is my favourite part of the story, she's at a market going about her ordinary business and she spots the same fairy man from that night.
Wow, so he's what, just out like buying some carrots like a normal person?
Yeah, exactly. He's there amongst the crowd, disguised in human form, and she, because she still has the fairy ointment on her eye, because it just doesn't wash off, recognises him immediately.
And what does she do? Does she say anything?
Yeah, she does. She approaches him, or sometimes just stares too long, and he realises she can see him. He turns to her and asks very calmly, "With which eye do you see me?"
Ooh, that makes all the little tiny hairs on the back of my neck go, ooh, sticky up. It's very chilling, isn't it? So he's not angry, he's just precise.
Yeah. And she answers honestly. She tells him which eye, and he reaches out and touches that eye.
And she loses the sight, right?
Gone forever. She can never see fairies again.
Wow, so the gift is taken back. The knowledge is erased.
Yeah, and that's what makes this more than just a fairy tale. It's a story about limits, about what happens when you cross a boundary you weren't meant to cross.
So, this historical case study, it's not just a story. What makes it historical?
Well, because versions of it weren't written down by scholars imagining fairy worlds. They were collected from real communities, midwives, farmers' wives, village storytellers, and they didn't tell it as once upon a time. They told it as something that had happened to a woman from the next village over.
Wow, that made it a lot more real, didn't it? They framed it like some kind of local memory, almost like gossip.
Yeah, as something that could have happened to someone your grandmother knew. And culturally, that tells us something huge.
Really? What's that?
Well, midwives were seen as people who already walked between worlds. Every day they stood at the threshold between life and death, between the body and whatever lies beyond it. They were trusted with the most liminal moments a human can experience.
So they were believable candidates for crossing into the fairy realm.
Yeah, they were trusted with thresholds. And the fairies in these stories, they're not sweet, not gentle, they're needy. They need human skill. They need human knowledge. They can't birth their own babies without a mortal woman's help.
Wow, that completely flips the power dynamic, doesn't it? The fairies, this thing that we've seen as all-powerful, they're not at all. They're dependent on us.
Yeah, and that's the heart of it. The fairy midwife legend isn't really about magic at its core.
What is it about?
It's about power. Who controls birth? Who controls sight? Who gets to cross the threshold? And who pays the price for it?
Which ties straight back into this week's story, because the fairy midwife isn't just helping deliver a child.
No, she's standing in the space between two realities, and whether she knows it or not, she's paying a price for being there.
Yeah, the price of seeing too much.
The price of knowing.
So let's talk about midwives nowadays, because what I love about the fairy midwife story is how alive it still feels, even today. It's not just some dusty old tale gathering cobwebs.
Yeah, well, think about it for a second. Modern midwives, doulas, birth attendants, they're still walking the edges every single day.
Edges between what and what?
Between life and death, between fear and hope, between the known and the completely unpredictable. Birth hasn't changed that much, has it? We have better medicine now, better tools, but the experience, the threshold, that's still there.
Good point. So is the danger. And just like the fairy midwife, they carry more than just tools in their enormous bags. They carry knowledge, yes, but also presence, intuition. They have to read the room, read the body, and pick up on subtle signals that no one else notices.
And then there's the psychological side of it, which we keep circling back to because it's so important.
Tell me more.
Today, people talk about birth as a threshold experience. Mind, body, spirit, all of it completely intertwined. Dreams during pregnancy, intuition about how things will go, even altered states during labour itself. Modern science is finally beginning to recognise that these experiences aren't just fluffy extras, they affect the outcomes.
So the inner world shapes the outer world, even in something as physical as birth.
Yeah, and think about postpartum practices too. Herbal baths for healing, teas for recovery, little rituals of protection for mother and child. Some families still do this without even thinking of it as magic.
Of course, they're echoes, aren't they? Echoes of the same principles the fairy midwife worked with. Not magic in the fantasy sense, not like, Harry Potter wands and spells, but very real, very practical care that addresses both the body and the mind.
And here's something else. The story reminds us of boundaries, thresholds, respect for life's big transitions.
And how do we practice that today?
Well, in birth centres, for sure. In home births, where families intentionally create a sacred space, but also in therapies for grief and trauma, places where people are guided through their own thresholds, creating safe space, slowing the moment down, acknowledging the emotional realities that you can't see, but are definitely there.
Yeah. And in dream work too, which connects straight back to our previous episodes.
Yeah, listening to dreams, journaling, using guided imagery to navigate fear or expectation or old trauma, that's a modern echo of seeing it with the fairy eye, being present for what's invisible and honouring it without needing to control it.
So the fairy midwife, she's not just folklore, she's a symbol of something which is still very much alive.
Yeah. In midwifery, in psychological support, in spiritual practices, helping, protecting, guiding through thresholds, often unseen, often unacknowledged, but always, always vital.
So maybe that's why the story still resonates after all these centuries, because she walks a path we all sometimes have to walk.
Which path?
The one between the worlds, between fear and between hope, between what we know for certain and what we can only trust.
Yeah, and like her, we don't always get to choose whether we cross that threshold. Sometimes it's just a knock at the door.
So, Paula, we've come to the end of another journey through the hedge.
Tonight, we walked into the hollow hill, right alongside a woman who had no idea, when she answered that knock at the door, where the night would take her.
And we found ourselves in that strange liminal space where birth and fear meet wonder, where the most ordinary act, helping a baby come into the world, becomes something that reaches across the realms.
The fairy midwife reminds us of something we don't talk about enough, that help can be sacred.
But also dangerous.
Yeah, because crossing into someone else's threshold, whether it's birth, grief, or just the unknown, changes you. You carry it with you.
And that's exactly why thresholds deserve respect. The ones we cross and the ones we invite others to cross with us.
And those who cross them, they never return unchanged. The fairy midwife lost something, her ordinary sight, her place in the everyday world, but she gained something too, a glimpse behind the veil.
Which brings us on to next week nicely, because we're following another woman who walked between worlds.
Ooh, tell me more.
The witch who spoke to the dead. So, a woman who crossed the ultimate threshold, not into the fairy hill, but into conversation with those who've left this world entirely.
Now that's a story I can't wait to hear.
Until then, though,
mind the threshold.
mind the thresholds. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of Witch Lore. Thank you for walking these ancient paths with us. We'll be back soon with another story from the hedge and the hearth. Until then, may your path be curious and kind. From Paula, Tracy, and all of us at Roaming Raven, blessed be.
If you enjoyed this show, please consider giving us a positive review on whatever platform you're listening on. Thank you to Georgia Rolls for our wonderful artwork, and to Psych Witch who wrote and produced our music. Find more of her lovely sounds on Spotify. This podcast has been produced by Roaming Raven.
Roaming through the hills.